After my father's funeral, my stepbrother Marcus approached me with a smile. "Sorry, James, but Dad left everything to me. The will is very clear." I just nodded and said, "Which will?" Because the real document was somewhere completely different. My name is James Patterson. I'm 38 years old, and I just buried the man who'd raised me for over 20 years. But even in grief, I couldn't ignore the satisfaction in Marcus Wilson's voice as he delivered what he thought was devastating news about my inheritance. Standing in the parking lot of St. Michael's Cemetery, surrounded by the lingering scent of funeral flowers and the quiet conversations of departing mourners, Marcus held a folded document in his hand like a winning lottery ticket. "I know this is hard to hear right after the service," he continued, his voice carrying just enough false sympathy to be insulting. "But Dad made his wishes very clear in his final will. Everything goes to me. The house, the business, the investments. All of it." I looked at the document he was waving and recognized my father's letterhead, his signature, even what appeared to be proper legal formatting. Marcus had done his homework. "That's interesting," I said quietly. "Can I see it?" "Of course." Marcus handed over the papers with the confidence of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. "I know you two had your differences, but I never expected him to cut you out completely." The will looked legitimate at first glance. It was dated 3 months before my father's death, properly witnessed, and contained language that left Marcus Wilson as the sole beneficiary of Edward Patterson's estate, valued at approximately $2.80 million. There was just one problem. I'd helped my father draft his real will 18 months earlier, and this wasn't it. "Marcus," I said, handing the document back, "we need to talk." "But not here." "What's to talk about? The will speaks for itself." "Trust me, we need to talk. To understand how we got to this moment, I need to explain the complicated family dynamics that had been building for over 15 years. My father, Edward Patterson, was a successful construction contractor who'd built his business from a single pickup truck into a company, employing 40 people and generating annual revenues of nearly $4 million. He was also a man who'd made the mistake of marrying the wrong woman at the wrong time in his life. My mother died when I was 14, leaving Dad and me to navigate life as a team. For 4 years, we managed well together. Dad threw himself into his business, and I focused on school and helping around the house when I could. When I was 18 and heading to college, Dad met Rebecca Wilson, a recently divorced woman with a 16-year-old son named Marcus. Rebecca was attractive, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in building a life with Dad. More importantly, she appeared to care about me and was supportive of my relationship with my father. Dad and Rebecca married when I was 19, and Marcus officially became my stepbrother. Initially, things worked well enough. Marcus was 2 years younger than me and seemed like a normal teenager dealing with his parents' divorce and adjustment to a new family situation. But as the years passed, subtle patterns emerged that should have been warning signs. Marcus had a way of positioning himself as the victim in family disputes, even when he was clearly at fault. When he wrecked Dad's truck during his senior year of high school, he somehow convinced Dad that it was really a mechanical failure rather than reckless driving. When he dropped out of college after 1 semester, he framed it as the professors being biased against him, rather than acknowledging that he'd simply stopped attending classes. More concerning was how Rebecca encouraged these narratives, consistently supported Marcus's version of events, even when they contradicted obvious facts. Dad, wanting to maintain peace in his new marriage, often went along with interpretations that allowed Marcus to avoid accountability. By the time I graduated from college and returned to work in Dad's business, Marcus had established himself as the family member who needed protection and support, while I was increasingly seen as the successful son who didn't require as much attention or assistance. I Worked in Patterson Construction for 12 years. Learning every aspect of the business, from project management to client relations to financial planning. Dad and I worked well together, and I genuinely loved the company we were building. We expanded into commercial projects, developed relationships with major clients, and built a reputation for quality work delivered on time and on budget. Marcus, meanwhile, drifted between jobs and half-hearted business ventures, always with explanations about why his latest opportunity hadn't worked out. Dad consistently bailed him out financially, funding everything from failed restaurant investments to unpaid credit card debts. "He's still young," Dad would say when I questioned. "The pattern. He needs time to find his direction." But Marcus was 33 years old and showing no signs of finding any direction beyond expecting Dad to solve his problems. The tension came to a head 3 years ago when Dad had his first heart attack. During his recovery, we had several conversations about the future of the business and his estate planning. "James, I want you to take over the construction company," he told me one afternoon as we sat on his back porch. "You've earned it, and you understand the business better than anyone." "What about Marcus?" "Marcus will be provided for, but the business needs someone who can actually run it. That's you." We spent several weeks working with Dad's attorney to structure his estate in a way that would ensure the business continued successfully while providing financial security for both Marcus and Rebecca. The plan was straightforward. I would inherit the construction company and the commercial properties that supported it, while Marcus would receive the family home, Dad's personal investments, and a substantial cash settlement. It was fair, generous, and designed to give both of us the foundation for financial independence. Marcus knew nothing about these estate planning discussions, but he must have sensed that his position as the baby of the family was becoming financially precarious as Dad and I worked more closely together. 6 months after Dad's heart attack, I noticed Marcus spending more time at Dad's house, often when I wasn't around. He'd started positioning himself as Dad's primary caretaker, despite the fact that Dad was fully recovered and didn't need assistance with daily activities. "Marcus has been so helpful," Rebecca would tell anyone who'd listen. "He comes by every day to check on Edward, help with errands, make sure he's taking his medications properly." What she didn't mention was that Dad wasn't taking any medications and didn't need help with errands. Marcus was inserting himself into Dad's daily routine for reasons that had nothing to do with caregiving. The manipulation became more obvious. During family gatherings, Marcus would make comments about how much he'd sacrificed to help Dad, how he'd put his own life on hold to be available for family needs, and how he hoped his dedication would be remembered. Dad, who valued loyalty above almost everything else, was clearly being influenced by this narrative. He started making comments about how Marcus had really stepped up and how blood family was the most important thing. The warning signs were all there, but I was too focused on running the business and managing my own life to realize how systematic Marcus's campaign had become. Dad's second heart attack came suddenly on a Tuesday evening in November. By the time I reached the hospital, he was unconscious and on life support. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery, but it was clear he'd need weeks of intensive care and rehabilitation. Marcus and Rebecca were already at the hospital when I arrived, and they'd somehow managed to position themselves as his primary medical decision-makers, despite the fact that I was his next of kin and business partner. The doctors said he might not wake up. Marcus told me with tears in his eyes. "We need to prepare for the worst." Dad did wake up 3 days later, but his recovery was slow, and he was clearly weakened by the second cardiac event. During the 2 weeks he spent in the hospital, Marcus was a constant presence, bringing flowers, reading to him, and generally playing the role of devoted son. I visited daily, but was also managing the construction company's operations and couldn't maintain the same level of bedside vigilance that Marcus's unemployment afforded him. Dad came home on a Friday afternoon, and we had what would turn out to be our last real conversation that Sunday evening. "James, I'm proud of what you've built with the company," he said, as we reviewed some project files in his study. "I know I can count on you to take care of things." "Dad, you're going to be fine. The doctors said the recovery looks good." "Maybe, but I want you to know that everything we've worked for is in good hands with you." That was the last time we spoke alone. Dad had a massive third heart attack following Wednesday night and died before the paramedics could arrive. The funeral was well attended, reflecting the respect Dad had earned in the construction industry and the community. Clients, employees, friends, and family members shared stories about his integrity, his work ethic, and his devotion to the people he cared about. Throughout the service, Marcus played the role of grieving son perfectly. He delivered a eulogy about Dad's unconditional love and belief in family above all else. He thanked everyone for their support during this impossible time and promised to honor Dad's memory by continuing his legacy of putting family first. I spoke briefly about Dad's professional accomplishments and his commitment to building something lasting, both in business and in the relationships he valued. After the graveside service, as people were preparing to leave, Marcus approached me with that triumphant smile and the document that would supposedly change both our lives. "James, I know this is painful, but we need to address Dad's final wishes," he said, producing the will with theatrical solemnity. "He updated his will just 3 months ago, and I'm afraid there are some changes you won't like." I read through the document carefully. It was professionally prepared, properly signed and witnessed, and appeared to leave Marcus as the sole beneficiary of Dad's entire estate. According to this will, Marcus would inherit the family home valued at $450,000, the construction company valued at approximately $1.8 million. Dad's investment portfolio worth $380,000, and his personal property. The total estate value was listed as $2.8 million, and none of it was designated for me. "I'm sorry, James," Marcus said, clearly trying to suppress his excitement. I had no idea Dad felt this way, but he must have been really grateful for all the care I provided during his illness. "When was this will prepared?" I asked. 3 months ago. Dad called me one day and said he wanted to update his estate planning. I drove him to the attorney's office myself. "Which attorney?" "Richardson and Associates downtown. They have all the documentation." I knew Richardson and Associates. They were a legitimate firm that Dad had used for some business legal work over the years, though not for his personal estate planning. "Marcus, this is a shock," I said honestly. "I need some time to process this." "Of course. Take all the time you need, but I'll need to take possession of the house and business assets fairly soon. There are operational issues that can't wait. I understand." What Marcus didn't understand was that I'd been present when Dad prepared his real will 18 months earlier with his longtime attorney, Patricia Morrison. That will contained very different provisions, and I had copies of all the documentation safely stored in my home safe. That evening, I called Patricia Morrison's office and scheduled an emergency meeting for the following morning. "James, I was expecting to hear from you," Patricia said when I arrived at her office. "I assume you're here about your father's estate." "Patricia, I need to ask you something important. Did Dad ever update his will after we met last year?" "Absolutely not. The will we prepared 18 months ago is the most recent document in our files." "Why do you ask?" I handed her Marcus's document. Patricia read through it carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each page. "James, this is not a document we prepared," she said finally. "The format is wrong, the language isn't consistent with our standard templates, and most importantly, your father never scheduled any appointments to update his estate planning." So this is a forgery? I can't make that determination without a detailed analysis, but I can tell you definitively that we didn't prepare this document. And if your father had wanted to change his will, he would have come to me. Patricia pulled out Dad's actual will from her files. The contrast was immediately obvious. While Marcus's document left everything to him, Dad's real will followed the plan we'd discussed. I would inherit the construction company and related assets. Marcus would receive the house and a substantial cash settlement, and Rebecca would be provided for through insurance policies and investment accounts. What should I do? I asked. First, we need to file the real will with the probate court immediately. Second, we need to report the suspected fraud to both the court and law enforcement. If someone forged your father's signature and created fraudulent legal documents, that's a serious crime. Will this delay the estate settlement? It will complicate things, yes. But James, if we don't act quickly, your stepbrother could potentially take control of assets that rightfully belong to you. The construction company alone represents your entire livelihood. I authorized Patricia to file the real will and begin the process of challenging Marcus's fraudulent document. But I also asked her to wait 48 hours before contacting law enforcement. I want to give Marcus a chance to explain himself, I said. Maybe there's something we don't understand. Patricia looked skeptical, but agreed to the delay. After noon, I called Marcus and asked him to meet me at Dad's house to discuss estate arrangements. Of course, he said eagerly. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. I know it's not easy to accept, but Dad's wishes were very clear. We met at 6 p.m. in Dad's study, the same room where he and I had spent countless hours working on business, plans, and discussing the future. Marcus arrived with a folder full of additional documents, property deeds, bank account information, and what appeared to be a comprehensive inventory of Dad's assets. I've been organizing everything, he explained. I want to make the transition as smooth as possible. Marcus, I need to ask you something directly. When exactly did you and Dad meet with Richardson and Associates to prepare this will? It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 months ago. Dad had been feeling weak since his second heart attack, and he said he wanted to make sure his affairs were in order. What did you two discuss during the meeting? Dad said he'd been thinking about everything I'd done for him during his illness. He said he realized that blood family was what mattered most, and that I'd proven my loyalty when it counted. Marcus was telling this story with the conviction of someone who'd rehearsed it many times. But there were problems with his timeline. Marcus, 3 months ago, Dad was fully recovered and back to working normal hours. He wasn't feeling weak, and he certainly wasn't concerned about his mortality. You weren't around as much as I was, James. You were always busy with the company. I saw how tired he was, how worried he was about the future. I was with Dad every day at the office. We had lunch together 3 times a week. He never mentioned updating his will or being worried about anything. Maybe he didn't want to burden you with his concerns. I opened my laptop and pulled up Dad's calendar from 3 months earlier. Marcus, can you tell me specifically which Tuesday you drove Dad to Richardson's office? I don't remember the exact date. That's strange, because Dad's calendar shows he was on a construction site in Flagstaff that entire week. He couldn't have been in Phoenix for a legal meeting. Marcus's confidence wavered slightly. Maybe it wasn't that week. Maybe it was a different Tuesday. Marcus, I keep Dad's calendar on my phone. I can show you every appointment he had for the past 6 months. There's no record of any meeting with Richardson and Associates. Calendars can be wrong. Dad's cell phone records would show calls to Richardson's office to schedule an appointment. Should we check those? That's when Marcus's carefully constructed story began to collapse. Look, James, I don't know why you're being so suspicious about this. Dad updated his will. I have the document. It's properly signed and witnessed. That's all that matters. Actually, there's something else that matters. Dad's real will was prepared 18 months ago with Patricia Morrison. I was there. When? He signed it. And it says something very different from your document. Marcus went pale. What do you mean, real will? I called Patricia Morrison's office and put the phone on speaker. Patricia, I'm here with Marcus. Can you please confirm when Dad last updated his will? James, your father's most recent will was executed 18 months ago in my office. He never scheduled any subsequent appointments to modify his estate. Planning. Marcus stared at the phone as if it had betrayed him personally. Patricia, I continued, can you also confirm what Dad's actual will says about the distribution of his assets? According to the will we prepared, you inherit Patterson, construction and the related commercial properties. Marcus inherits the family residence and receives a cash settlement of $400,000. Rebecca receives the proceeds from your father's life insurance policies. Marcus stood up abruptly. This is impossible. Dad told me he was changing everything. He said I'd be taken care of. Marcus, Dad did take care of you? $400,000 is a substantial inheritance. But he wasn't going to give you the business you'd never shown any interest in running. But the will I have. The will you have is either a forgery or a fraud. And if you try to file it with the probate court, you'll be committing a felony. Marcus sat back down, and for the first time since Dad's funeral, his mask of confident entitlement slipped completely. I didn't forge anything, he said quietly. I paid someone to prepare a new will based on what Dad told me he wanted. Who? Did you pay? A guy named Thompson. He said he was a paralegal who could handle simple estate documents. Marcus, you can't just pay someone to create a will. The person making the will has to sign it themselves in front of witnesses with full knowledge of what they're signing. But Dad was planning to change everything. He told me so. When did he tell you that? During one of our conversations? When I was helping him after his heart attack. What exactly did he say? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He said he appreciated everything I'd done for the family. He said he'd make sure I was taken care of. Marcus, being taken care of doesn't mean inheriting everything. Dad's real will provides you with a house and $400,000. That's being taken care of. But it's not fair. I spent months taking care of him while you were focused on the business. You spent months manipulating him while I was keeping his business running so there would be something to inherit. The conversation continued for another hour, but the essential facts were clear. Marcus had misinterpreted Dad's gratitude for his attention during his illness as a promise to change his will. When that change didn't happen, Marcus had paid someone to create a fraudulent document that would give him what he felt he deserved. The question now was what to do about it. Marcus, you have two choices, I said finally. You can accept Dad's real will, which gives you a house and $400,000, or you can try to probate your fraudulent document and face criminal charges for attempted fraud. What if I just forget about the other will? What if I never filed it? Then you inherit exactly what Dad wanted you to inherit, and we can all move forward. And you won't report the fraud? If you destroy that document and never mention it again, I'll consider the matter closed. Marcus looked at the folder containing his fraudulent will and supporting documents. He'd spent months planning what he thought would be the perfect inheritance theft, only to discover that the real will already provided for him generously. I never meant for this to get so complicated, he said. I just thought Dad was being unfair to me. Dad was being exactly as fair as he could be. He gave you a substantial inheritance while ensuring the business went to someone who could actually run it. Marcus nodded slowly and handed me the folder containing all his fraudulent documents. What happens now? He asked. Now you inherit $400,000 and a beautiful house. You use that foundation to build your own life instead of trying to steal mine. 6 months later, the estate was settled according to Dad's real will. Marcus received his inheritance and moved into Dad's house. To his credit, he used part of the money to start a legitimate small business and seemed to be making an honest effort to build something on his own. Rebecca, it turned out, had been completely unaware of Marcus's fraudulent will scheme. She received her life insurance benefits and maintained an amicable relationship with both of us. As for me, I inherited Patterson Construction and have continued building the company Dad and I created together. The business is thriving, our employees are secure, and Dad's legacy of quality work and ethical business practices continues. The forged will is locked in my safe as a reminder of how greed can make people do desperate things, and how the truth has a way of protecting itself if you're patient enough to let it work. Marcus learned an expensive lesson about the difference between appreciation and entitlement. But more importantly, he learned that the best inheritance isn't what someone leaves you. It's what you build yourself with the foundation they provide. Dad's real gift to both of us wasn't money or property. It was the opportunity to prove we could be better than our worst impulses, that we could choose integrity over immediate gratification. And that family means more than just who gets what when someone dies. In the end, the inheritance thief discovered that the greatest theft would have been stealing his own integrity. And thankfully, he chose to give it back before it was too late.